Okay, prepare to hear a ton of WWE facts and stories that will pull a range of emotions, my friend. You'll laugh, you'll gasp, and you certainly will not believe some of the Wild West happenings of the 80s. Yep, it was quite a time. So with that in mind, I'm Gareth, this is What Culture Wrestling, and here are 50 fascinating facts about WWE in the 1980s. Number 50, Dusty Rhodes was nearly Hulk Hogan. Firstly, the entire decade as you know it could have been drastically different. Hulkamania became a go-to buzzword to sum the WWF's boom period up. But here's a quick did you know? Ready? Muscle-bound brute and all-round action figure come-to-life Hulk Hogan did not leap into Vince McMahon's mind as the first viable candidate to build his retooled company around. No, it was actually one Dusty Rhodes. Vince told this story for maybe the first time during his 6-part Netflix doc. There, Dusty's son Cody appeared as a talking head and might have revealed exactly why Daddy Dearest didn't get the nod in front of Hogan. Basically, Rhodes said his father never truly believed in what McMahon was trying to do with all the glitz, glamour, and monopolization. Pivoting, Vince pinpointed Hulk as the ideal replacement for a technical wrestling babyface like Bob Backlund, and the rest is history. Just imagine how different things could have been. I mean, it's kind of wild that Cody is to modern WWE now what his dad nearly was in the 1980s. Dusty was gonna be the focal point, the kind of smart-talking promo machine who could sell Fed pay-per-views aplenty, and the sort who watched merchandise fly off the shelves. American Dream instead of American Made would have been the battle cry. But it wasn't to be. McMahon either decided against Dusty in the end, or didn't feel like Rhodes was meeting him halfway anyway. Dusty stayed put in the NWA for now. Hulk became the water carrier, and the WWF revolution burst into life. I know it's hard to envision anyone in Hogan's shoes, but hey, that almost happened. Number 49, Hulk Hogan didn't go babyface until 1984. Most wrestling fans worldwide who either lived through the era or have gobbled it up via WWE Network, Peacock, Netflix, old VHS tapes, or DVDs or whatever would agree that the 80s belonged to Hulkamania. However, that wasn't even really a thing until after Hogan had won the WWF title from the Iron Sheik in January 1984. In truth, it took until halfway through the decade for Hulk to become the man. He'd been an arrogant heel for years before going full baby. Yeah, must have been a hard character to play that. The turn came when Hogan rushed out to save happy-go-lucky face Bob Backlund from a vicious Sheik attack. Bob endorsed Hulk as the right guy to cut the heel menace down, and the WWF never looked back. Hogan beat Sheik to bag the belt. Then he coined the Hulkamania term before using it to pad his bank account and company coffers to the tune of millions, brother. It's easy to think back to the 80s and say that entire 10-year period belonged to the Hulkster. But that isn't strictly true. If anything, he didn't truly come into his own as the franchise player until around midway through the decade. Now, being fair, Hogan's brand did dominate everything from 1984 onwards. It had proved troublesome for McMahon and cohorts to move on from Hulk well into the 90s, put it that way. The thought of Hulk Hogan being a villain at any point during the 80s might be tough for some fans to grasp. Again though, he didn't actually really go baby until saving Backlund from Sheik and vowing revenge on the placeholder champ. And number 48, Iron Sheik had the shortest singles reign of the decade. Nobody can erase the fact Iron Sheik was WWF champion. But context is important. He was only champ for 28 days between the 26th of December 1983 to the 23rd of January 1984. To put that into context, no other WWF World title reign in the 80s lasted less than 100 days. Most surpassed that number by a huge margin, which makes Sheik's run with the belt stand out as, well, an oddity for the era. For reference, gimmicky storylines like Andre the Giant winning the title then trying to sell it to pal Ted Dibiasi aren't officially recognized as reigns by WWE, so they won't be here either. That means Sheik's time on top was the shortest singles reign of the entire 10-year span. Somewhat incredibly, it was even shorter than every Intercontinental title stint too. The only one that comes close is Ricky Steamboat's 65-day run with that secondary strap in 1987. Still, that was over twice as long. Iron Sheik was only thrust into the title hot seat at all because the WWF didn't want Hogan to beat Bob Backlund. McMahon reasoned, quite rightly, that it'd mean more if Hulk won his first major belt from a hated heel, rather than someone who'd carried the can as a babyface hero since the late 70s. Hogan dropping Bob was never on the cards, folks. This did, however, carve out a pleasing and rather unique piece of history for Sheik. Things going on politically in the pro wrestling biz around the time he became champion meant he could point to his title reign as a true WWF/WWE first forevermore. Speaking of which, number 47, Sheik was also the first modern WWE champ. The World Wrestling Federation wouldn't sit idly by as contented members of the National Wrestling Alliance much longer. Previously, the group had left the NWA in 1963, but soon rejoined by the turn of the new decade in 1971. When Vince Jr. seized control from his father, though, he decided to break away from the alliance all over again. That happened in late 1983, which coincided with Iron Sheik becoming WWF champion. Thus, Sheiky Baby was a true first. He was the original and first out-and-out WWF World Champion of the era. In retrospect, McMahon probably would have preferred it had that distinction gone to new poster boy Hulk Hogan, but nope, Sheik beat him to it. You just know that had to put a big old smile on his face. Take that, Hulkster. Sheik equals number one. Stay humble, etc, etc. Seriously though, this was historically significant. Prior champs like Bob Backlund and often Bruno Sammartino had been promoted under the NWA banner despite being WWF title holders. Sheik wasn't, and neither was Hogan once he supplanted the heel as champion. This was truly a brand new era for the promotion, one that let them stand on their own merits away from the sometimes restrictive alliance and its members. And WWE's top prize would never be beholden to another organization ever again. It's amazing to think that Iron Sheik was the guy on top when this change was made. That sounds like the answer to a particularly obscure trivia question. So if it comes up in a pub quiz, you are welcome, and I expect a pint when I see you. Speaking of the WWF/WWE title, I want to know right now, what is your favorite WWF whatever it is title match of the 80s? Because, you know, this video is about the 80s, so why not? Let me know in the comments. Number 46, Sergeant Slaughter left the WWF due to a toy dispute. Reportedly, Sergeant Slaughter left the company in 1985 because Vince McMahon wanted to trample all over his deal on G.I. Joe action figures. Right, that didn't work for Sarge, so he bolted to the AWA and wouldn't return until 1990. There are contrasting claims on this though, and even Slaughter himself has offered up a different story by saying Vince actually scrapped him due to his protest over a planned then aborted 6-week vacation. Interesting, but the G.I. Joe thing has persisted over the years as the main reason for Sarge's dismissal. He fled to Vern Gagne's failing AWA, then penned a letter to McMahon saying he enjoyed the product and thought he could contribute. That, pretty bizarrely, led to the biggest run of Slaughter's entire career, and an unlikely WWF title reign in the early 1990s. What a weird world. Back to the 80s we go though, come on, let's go. Vince was ruthlessly headhunting his own toy deals for WWF stars at the time, so he perhaps didn't take kindly to a wrestler going out on his own with a third party. After all, that'd potentially take some cash out of McMahon's pockets, and he couldn't have that, could he? This kind of legal jousting for control over a performer's complete working life became a WWE norm under Vince. In the short term, Sarge didn't have much to worry about. He'd blown up as a pop culture sensation due to the G.I. Joe links, and he figured that'd sustain him for a while. Besides, nobody knew for sure just how long McMahon's juggernaut approach was gonna last for the WWF back then. Quite a while though, as it turned out, he was not going anywhere. If you are finding this list you're watching right now quite interesting, then there's more where that came from when you tap on that subscribe button down below. Number 45, Bret Hart was nearly a cowboy first. Okay, so Bret superfans might not want to admit it, but the Hitman of 1984 likely had more in common with workman-like NWA wrestlers over on the other channel than he did with WWF heavy hitters like Hulk Hogan. Hart just wanted to wrestle and show what he could do bell to bell. So imagine his outright horror when Fed Top Brass told him they wanted him to play a cowboy gimmick and literally become Cowboy Bret Hart with 2 T's. Yeehaw! Saddle up and ride out of town immediately. That was going to be Bret's immediate response, but he had something else in mind, and it was so typically dry of him. In Calgary, if you called yourself a cowboy, then you better be one, were his words. Simple as that, really. Hart also said he couldn't ride a horse, and only wanted to be a wrestler who got over for his skills. Knowing the era, it is somewhat remarkable that Vince McMahon didn't discard him right then and there for knocking back one of his seemingly dumb gimmicks. It's a good thing he didn't, obviously, because Bret went on to become one of his linchpin stars of the 90s. He was over in the 80s too, albeit as a tag team wrestler alongside Jim Neidhart in the Hart Foundation instead of as a standalone success. Being in a double act and splitting the spotlight was 100 times better than pretending to be a cowboy, in Bret's mind at least. Hart did work some matches as that character, but it wasn't long before he talked everyone down backstage, fought his corner, and managed to become something a bit more realistic. Hitman wasn't literal, but it was infinitely cooler, though if anyone could pull off the boots and hat, it would be Bret, right? Number 44, a perfect swap for Curt Hennig. So legend has it that none other than Terry Taylor was the first pick to play a new Mr. Perfect character the WWF had whipped up. Both he and Curt Hennig joined the company at roughly the same time in 1988. So yeah, this adds up. But instead of becoming perfect, Taylor was turned into the appalling Red Rooster. And that's something Bruce Pritchard has defended to this day by suggesting Terry could have made something of the guys had he only put his all into it. That's, debatable. I mean, look at him. What are you gonna do with that? It's unclear whether or not Hennig would have been hitched with the Rooster persona had Taylor taken on the Mr. Perfect name. But that is one hell of a lucky escape if so. Curt fit the perfect character, well, perfectly. Like with most of the best gimmicks ever, it's legit challenging to picture anyone else spitting that gum up into the air, then smacking it with their hand, or another wrestler appearing in those memorable introductory vignettes. Hennig was just born to play this part. If it's true that these guys might have swapped roles, then you've gotta feel sorry for Terry too. He was an accomplished technician with bags of potential before joining the Federation, but all of that promise fizzled away once he started strutting around the place like an actual rooster. Look, there are several excellent cartoonish and over-the-top gimmicks. I mean, The Undertaker, for example. But this was not one of them. Poor Taylor became everything he probably hated. Things were so dire that Taylor wound up leaving the WWF in 1990 and barely got another look in besides an unremarkable 1992 to 1993 stint as terrific Terry Taylor. There was certainly nothing terrific about the Red Rooster, folks. Hey, you know it's bad when Bobby Heenan can't get it over. Number 43, the original Screwjob. If you listen real carefully, there is a chance the doors around Bret Hart's house say Montreal Screwjob when they squeak. I'm never doing that again. It came to define his WWF/WWE run, which is a shame really. But he wasn't the first to lose a belt live in the ring because Vince McMahon deemed it so. Wendy Richter was the unfortunate victim of the first Screwjob. That took place in November 1985. Richter hit the ring for what she assumed was a routine women's title defense versus the Spider. But little did she know that McMahon had instructed Fabulous Moolah, who was underneath the mask, to forcibly pin Wendy's shoulders to the mat so she'd become the brand new champion. This was McMahon's cutthroat way of reminding Richter not to mess around and sign a new contract he'd put in front of her. Reportedly, Wendy was dead set against doing that because she was already in the midst of a 5-year deal that had more favorable terms. So Vince decided to turn scripted wrestling real and take the title from his wrestler in the most underhanded way imaginable. Distraught, Wendy left the venue in her wrestling gear, and that was a wrap on her WWF run until she was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2010. And during his Netflix doc, McMahon showed no compassion towards Richter at all. He said he simply had to take his title back if she wasn't going to play ball. Number 42, Ricky Steamboat almost played a masked heel. Any big fan of wrestling output in the 80s and 90s could tell you that Ricky Steamboat was born to be a permanent babyface. The Dragon fit that bill just so well. He was like Rey Mysterio. He was fair, professional, friendly, but competitive, and had forged a sweet connection with fans all over the place. So it may come as a slight surprise to learn that WWF considered turning Ricky heel before he left the company in 1988. Steamboat held talks with McMahon and Pat Patterson about possibly going under a mask as a villain. That would have been the soft approach, because then at least Ricky could revert to type if the heel turn flopped. Eventually, all three guys agreed that trying to turn Steamboat bad wouldn't work unless there was some sort of seismic twist to his character. In other words, he needed a better reason. In theory, Dragon could have played both sides of the babyface heel alignment fence at the same time. Baby without the hood and heel with it. Now that would have been impressive had he been able to pull that off, especially when Steamboat wrestled such a visibly distinctive style. This was all conjecture anyway. He ended up going back to to the NWA/WCW instead for a world title tilt opposite Ric Flair. Ricky would never contemplate going heel again. It looks like 1988 was his one and only chance to make that a reality. But who knows for sure if fans would have accepted it? They might well have continued cheering Steamboat anyway, which would have likely irked McMahon and been a big ol' waste of time. We'll never really know for sure though, will we? Number 41, Shane McMahon debuted in the 80s. Generally, when people stop to think about the 1980s, they do not place Shane McMahon in that era. He's very much a product of the Attitude days of the 90s. That's when Shane-O came into his own as a stunt-heavy boy wonder who gave Jeff Hardy a run for his money by leaping off high places like a WWF/WWE daredevil. However, it's true. It's damn true. McMahon can point and say he worked on PPV in the 80s by a hair. But hey, you can still say it. For reference, Shane was called Shane Stevens whenever he was mentioned, so nobody would think about Vince McMahon. That's the same sort of trick the WWF pulled for referee Joey Morella. Calling him Joey Monsoon would have drawn comparisons to Gorilla, of course, and they didn't want to do that. Similarly, Vince didn't want to heap pressure on his young son's shoulders just as he was breaking in or helping out at shows. Shane Stevens could be seen as a ringside ref who helped shepherd eliminated wrestlers backstage once they'd been pinned, submitted, or disqualified. He was cutting his teeth and figuring things out, but yeah, he was there, my friend. McMahon can boast about being a star of the 80s pay-per-view boom by around a month and change. He transitioned to becoming a referee inside the ring after that, but then vanished from screens until his 1998 reprise as a loudmouth silver spoon character who rubbed his father's wealth in everyone's faces. He then became harder than everyone years later. It was hard as nails, that Shane O'Mac. Number 40, Andre didn't like other giants. Watching a frankly knackered Andre the Giant amble around WWF rings in the late 80s has become less fun now us fans know how much pain the man was in just existing. In his prime, an athletic Andre was able to hit dazzling moves like drop kicks, and he wasn't against taking a bump or two either. But by the mid-80s, even walking around the ring hurt him, so it's perhaps no surprise the Giant was a tad cranky. He also got rather defensive when other large workers were brought into the fold. By most accounts, Andre was fairly easy to get along with so long as you were friendly backstage, didn't irk his buddies, and liked socializing on the road. However, this Giant was fiercely protective of his role, and that meant he didn't take to guys like Big John Studd, like at all. Wrestlers like Ted DiBiase and Jake Roberts, as well as staffers who were around Andre loads like Bruce Pritchard, have all told stories about Andre dismissing the '89 Rumble winner and being a bit frosty towards him behind the curtain. Studd wasn't the only person Andre clashed with. Other wrestlers Andre had to put in their place included the Ultimate Warrior, Bam Bam Bigelow, and even the Fabulous Freebirds. The latter core weren't giants, but they needed a not-so-gentle reminder from a locker room leader to behave. And as time went on, the Giant got even more salty about being the only big man in town. Number 39, Iron Sheik claimed he was told to break Hulk Hogan's leg. When he wasn't beating Hulk to the punch by becoming the first modern-day WWF World Champion, the Iron Sheik was showing respect for Vinnie Mac's soon-to-be marketing sensation. Sheik used to tell a story about being offered no less than $100,000 by AWA owner Vern Gagne to break Hogan's leg during their title bout in January 1984. It's worth saying the Gagne family refute this as false, but it's still become legend amongst fans. Gagne was apparently fuming that Hulk had traded AWA main events for the significantly brighter lights of McMahon's glossy WWF revolution. There was serious backlash against Vince's crusade from other promoters in the industry, but only a handful of folks would have known for sure whether or not old Vern was serious about his cash for broken bones offer. Also, it's unlikely that even a knackered leg would have stopped Hulkamania from shooting for the moon eventually anyway. McMahon's marketing might, combined with Hulk's charisma and exaggerated physique, meant change was coming to the business whether Gagne, or anyone else for that matter, wanted it to or not. They were all genuinely powerless to stop the WWF from becoming what the world was watching. Regardless, Sheik spurned the chance to go into business for himself himself and do Hogan in. He stared at the lights as requested like a pro, and bagged a few more runs under Vince's banner because of his professionalism. Meanwhile, the AWA started circling the drain before vanishing for good in 1991. They had been casually mowed down by McMahon's monopolization of the North American market. Number 38, Jake Roberts was actually scared of snakes, reaching the promised land of WWF superstardom and then playing a gimmick you are legitimately terrified of. Yeah, that's a nightmare for any pro wrestler. Imagine having a phobia of snakes and then literally carrying one to ringside with you every single night. Well, that happened to sweet personal redemption story Jake Roberts, and it was his own damn fault. In a 2019 interview with the Gazette, Jake revealed that he's actually freaked the hell out by slithering snakes. He came up with the gimmick while smoking a lot of pot and drinking a lot of beer, in his words, and added that's what happens when you indulge. Yeah, that's one way of putting it. Fully aware that a lot of people worldwide near enough pass out upon clapping eyes on the reptiles, Roberts decided it'd make for one hell of a visual if he played on that to create a new character. Then he sobered up, realized what he'd set in motion, and probably thought twice about it. The guys became an instant hit though, and Jake the Snake Roberts had a neat ring to it that just rolled off one's tongue. I had his action figure as a kid and I thought he was the absolute coolest. It is incredible to think that he was scared of snakes all those years though. I mean, that'd be like Coco Beware having ornithophobia, or however you say it. Or Bryan Danielson being scared of having great matches. Okay, maybe that last one doesn't fit quite as well as the Coco point, but you get what I mean. Roberts didn't go so far as to say he regretted coming up with the idea whilst under the influence, but it did still strike him as odd that he'd willingly take himself out of his comfort zone in pursuit of wrestling success. Number 37, what the hell is a Dingo Warrior? Known bodybuilding fanatic Vince McMahon's eyes must have been popping out of his skull when he saw promo pics of walking bicep muscle the Ultimate Warrior before signing him in 1987. But the then Jim Hellwig wasn't going by that ring name quite yet. Nah, he was actually touring the territorial circuit as the Dingo Warrior. Doesn't sound quite as threatening or badass, does it? Bruce Pritchard has told a story on his popular podcast that Vince's reply reverberated around the room.
What the hell is a Dingo Warrior?
And it was a fair point. McMahon noticed that his new hire had been working house shows under that very name, and he was baffled as to why anyone would want to be called Dingo Warrior. So it was quickly changed when everybody banged heads backstage to come up with the ultimate branding. That, for those interested, was supposed to be a grander version of the feel that the Road Warriors were already going for. The Ultimate Warrior was to be a heightened incarnation of their unstoppable squash match glory, which is actually pretty smart when you stop to think about it. The WWF took one of wrestling's most over gimmicks, handed it to their new recruit, and they managed to sidestep awkward glances when the word Dingo was part of Howard Finkel's match intros. I bet everyone in those arenas were asking what a Dingo Warrior was too. I've still no clue. Sorry, but the thought of Hulk Hogan versus the Dingo Warrior headlining WrestleMania 6 is it's almost too funny, isn't it? That wouldn't even have been the weirdest pitch for that pay-per-view though. But stay tuned for more on that later. Number 36, Fit Finley was in WWE's first match on UK soil. Now this is rather quirky. The WWF's first foray into the United Kingdom market happened on the 10th of October 1989. That night, they held a show taped for Sky TV, and the company came armed with some huge matches. The first WWF UK event, catchy name I know, was headlined by Hulk Hogan versus Randy Savage. Meanwhile, other bouts like Bret Hart versus Dino Bravo and Jim Duggan versus the Honky Tonk Man also littered the snazzy undercard. TV favourites such as Duggan or Hart would not be the first wrestlers fans who were there live in London saw come through the curtain though. Nope, the show opened with a dark match starring several stalwarts of the European scene. And Fit Finley was one of them. He teamed with Mark Rocco and Skull Murphy versus Al Perez, Dale Wolf and Tim Horner. Yes, Hornswoggle's Da was in the first ever WWF/WWE match on UK shores. That sounds crazy and like a complete clash of eras, right? Finley wouldn't become a recognizable star on mainline wrestling telly until his WCW run in the mid to late 90s. and he didn't become a WWE star until well after that. So the thought of him jogging down the aisle for a WWF match way back in 1989 is pretty out there. It'd be like finding out Drew McIntyre was in a dark bout at Rebellion 2002 or something. Oh yeah, I remember that time Big Drew beat Johnny Moss before the cameras started rolling on Booker T versus Matt Hardy. Your head would fall off, wouldn't it? Finley's team got the victory too, which also means he won WWE's first ever match on British shores as well. What a world. Number 35, the Rockers were fired after one TV match. Praise the wrestling lords for second chances, because without them, us fans would have been robbed of two spectacular Shawn Michaels stints in the WWF/WWE. Before becoming HBK, Shawn was part of the Midnight Rockers tag team with fellow high flyer Marty Jannetty. They were hired in June 1987, the Midnight bit was chopped from their name, and then the ex-AWA pair were fired after a few short weeks. What? Shawn and Marty quickly earned a reputation as wild, out-of-control party animals who could not be tamed and would not listen to authority. And that irritated various agents at house shows and TV tapings alike. So Vince had to make an example of the rebellious pair. They were promptly fired and returned to Ganya territory. But the Rockers would return in June 1988 for another whirl. They'd learned a valuable lesson. Michaels and Jannetty were still up for a party, but they knew they had to be professional and do the business in-ring first and foremost. In total, the Rockers only worked one match taped for an episode of Wrestling Challenge during that initial spurt. It came versus Jose Estrada and Jimmy Jack Funk, but the bout probably never surfaced due to their run being so short. McMahon knew he had to discourage newbies from irking his staff. He surely didn't want to cut the Rockers loose after bringing them in from a competitor, but the pair didn't leave Vince with much of a choice here. At least things worked out well in the long run though. After being brought back, Shawn went on to become one of the biggest stars ever in the 90s. So yeah, here's the second chances. Number 34, the true importance of Saturday night's main event. Retro flair has cannoned back into view thanks to WWE making Saturday night's main event part of the modern product. That will introduce the show to a brand new generation, which should be enough to bring a tear to even the frostiest old fans' eyes. After all, this is not the first time Saturday night's main event has been hugely important to the promotion. It was a shot in the arm for the biz when the WWF debuted it back in May 1985. That NBC special marked the first time pro wrestling had been seen on network television since the 1950s. It was a massive success for the WWF. Saturday night's main event popped a monster 8.8 rating and replaced weekend staple Saturday Night Live sporadically due to that number. Casual interest from regular TV viewers made a mockery of anyone claiming that McMahon's outfit did nothing for wrestling as a whole. That argument looked quite foolish by mid-1985. WWE has had a love-hate relationship with Saturday night's main event ever since, but they've recently brought it back around as a nostalgic blast from the past. It's also the ideal way to bridge gaps between major PLE events, and an excuse to promote killer matches like Cody Rhodes versus Kevin Owens. It's a win-win for the audience, really. It always feels like an easy watch too. The TV industry has changed tenfold since the 80s, obviously, but nobody should downplay just how important Saturday night's main event was to wrestling's never-ending fight for acceptance in the mainstream media fold. Numbers don't lie. People were into everything the WWF was selling around that time. Number 33, why Bobby Heenan replaced Tully Blanchard. Fans tuning into Survivor Series 1989 were given a rare treat in the main event. Sharp manager meets commentator Bobby Heenan stepped foot in the ring to team with Andre the Giant, Arn Anderson, and Haku versus the Ultimate Warrior, the Rockers, and Jim Neidhart. Originally, Heenan was supposed to camp out around ringside and watch Tully Blanchard do his thing, but the WWF pivoted. Why? Well, Brainbusters duo Arn and Tully had told management shortly after SummerSlam 89 that they planned to finish up dates and then go back to the NWA/WCW. Vince McMahon was understandably peeved by this, so he took the tag straps from the pair and started jobbing them out. Standard practice for promoters in that era, sadly. Even so, the Busters were supposed to play a major part at Survivor Series. Then Blanchard failed a drugs test, so instead of punishing Arn some more, McMahon asked Heenan to step in as a late replacement. The boss knew Bobby could get the job done because he'd been an accomplished wrestler before becoming more of a mouthpiece. And remarkably, Heenan was the final one eliminated by Warrior's team. He even got to eliminate Marty Jannetty earlier in the match. But none of this would have happened had Tully passed the backstage test. Seeing Heenan out there in a singlet similar to Andre the Giant's was some laugh, folks. And the manager pretty much stole the the show with his bumping and facial expressions. He was bloody hilarious. Blanchard missed out on a payoff, sure, but fans got to see Bobby main event a WWF pay-per-view, and that is a win in my book. Number 32, other promoters thought WWF success was a fad. Casual interest from regular TV viewers made a mockery of anyone claiming that McMahon's outfit did nothing for wrestling as a whole. Yeah, that sentence right there from a few entries ago summed up industry attitudes towards what the WWF achieved throughout the 1980s. Almost tragically, a lot of the groups that Vince ruthlessly cut down didn't even think that would be possible in the first place. Mid-South's Joel Watts once said that McMahon was making wrestlers out to be freaks or something. It is a bit baffling that people within the same medium were content to ignore circus-like tendencies of the industry as a whole for decades before Vince Jr. monopolized. It was hardly like funky gimmicks were exclusive to the World Wrestling Federation. To pretend otherwise through hatred or jealousy was just foolish. Watts continued by claiming the WWF's boom was a fad that will pass away. And, well, he was 100% wrong about that, wasn't he? WWE only got stronger, then dipped in the mid-90s before rising to the top again later that same decade. It's been the market leader by a mile ever since, so it's fascinating to think those working in wrestling viewed Fed domination as a temporary wound that they'd recover from like nothing had ever happened. Writing off the WWF's success in the 80s as a fad is quite something, but yeah, that's how some saw it. Perhaps they were only trying to convince themselves most of all. Whatever helps you sleep at night, eh? Mid-South and many other competitors were wiped off the map before the 80s had even wrapped up. Number 31, a 1987 highway arrest caused huge problems. McMahon acknowledged the worked machinations of the pro wrestling industry to deftly avoid restrictive Sports Athletic Commission rules that he felt were holding him back. And that horrified some within the grappling sphere, but Vince promoted his WWF as sports entertainment and felt it deserved to be separate from legitimate sporting events. Even so, the Federation still liked to keep up pretense of bad blood between heels and babyfaces on television, and that's why an incident involving Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik was so troublesome. Both were riding in the same car when they were pulled over and busted for drug possession in May 1987. This was particularly awkward considering the pair had been feuding on WWF shows. Kayfabe, while definitely on the way out, was still a hot topic, so it was pretty embarrassing for Duggan and Sheik to pull the curtain back so suddenly. Oops. Vince responded by punishing both to varying degrees. Sheik left the promotion in October, though he'd return the following year, take another sabbatical, then come back again in 1991. And Duggan's babyface push stalled. It certainly wasn't a good look that two wrestlers who were supposed to be arch rivals within the context of the WWF product had been traveling together and carrying drugs. Yep, not a good look at all. Admittedly, Hacksaw got back to top form within a few months. He was even included in a tournament for the vacant WWF title at WrestleMania 4, but lost in the first round to Ted Dibiasi. It's doubtful most other wrestlers blinked when they heard about the arrest, but the WWF had to show that Duggan and Sheik's incident would not be tolerated again. Number 30, Coco Beware was fired for brawling with a WWF executive. If WWE chiefs thought they'd have a quiet end to the decade, then they were dead wrong, my friend. During a European tour in late 1989, normally upbeat mid-card babyface Coco Beware wound up brawling with an executive in public. Things threatened to get right out of hand, and Ware was fired during a tear-filled phone call with Vince the following day. And executive Jim Troy got the same treatment for his part in things. Coco was playing piano in a restaurant lounge when he heard Shawn Michaels arguing with Troy in another room. Intervening, the Birdman took over from Michaels and began fighting with Jim. Things calmed, then got messy all over again back at the hotel. And once Beware was gone, his pal Hulk Hogan convinced McMahon to give him another shot just 6 weeks later. That led to another run, albeit as more of a jobber to the Stars, who had no chance of becoming champion, and eventually a WWE Hall of Fame induction. So it all kind of worked out in the end, I guess. Jim Troy left the wrestling business and went off to do other things. It is said some were slightly shocked that Vince fired Troy. He'd been a popular executive and and looked to have a bright future as part of the company. But again, McMahon had to flex his boss muscles and try to make sure nothing of the sort ever happened again. This wouldn't be the last backstage fight in the WWF/WWE by any means, but it was one of the messiest from a PR perspective. A wrestler brawling with a corporate suit in front of the general public was never going to be a good look for the promotion, was it? Number 29, the WWF roster egged David Schultz on. Wrestlers fighting with WWF execs is one thing, but how about wrestlers cuffing the crap out of journalists on camera? Well, that's what known tough guy David Schultz did to reporter John Stossel in 1984 during a 2020 piece designed to expose wrestling as fake. The roster didn't know that was Stossel's plan when he arrived, but word quickly got around that he was working a hatchet job on the industry. During Vince's documentary on Netflix, Hulk Hogan appeared as a talking head and admitted that various wrestlers fired David up before he agreed to do an interview with Stossel. He went into his segment with a point to prove and infamously slapped the reporter as hard as he could several times. Naturally, this led to legal action against Schultz, McMahon, and the WWF. It never rains, but it pours. Stossel sued everyone and received a $425,000 settlement. Later, he expressed regret at taking things to court because of the impact lawsuits can have on innocent bystanders who are just working hard for an organization. Meanwhile, Schultz maintained that it was McMahon who told him to strike the journalist and put him in his place, but Vince has never acknowledged that. What a shock. Schultz clearly shouldn't have put his hands on somebody who wasn't part of the show. Like, you just don't do that ever. But it was ill-advised of Stossel to brazenly spit to an already irate working pro wrestler that what he did was a fake. Yeah, not wise. Thankfully, the WWF could draw a line under this after settling in court, but the incident has still been replayed hundreds of times over the years, and it will likely continue to be. Number 28, Hulk Hogan was sued for a publicity stunt gone wrong. Need even more WWF-related legal drama? Well, you got it. The WWF marketing machine was understandably keen to get as much mainstream press as possible heading into a make-or-break WrestleMania 1 supercard in 1985, and having a mainstream celeb like Mr. T on board sure helped. Together, the A-Team star and Hulk Hogan appeared on cable show Hot Properties to promote, and promote again. But nobody was prepared for what happened next. Host Richard Belzer needled the pair about wrestling being fake. Yep, nothing new there. And he stupidly begged Hulk to put a move on him. Now, Hogan actually avoided this for a while, but eventually put Belzer in a front face lock that legit knocked the interviewer unconscious right before a commercial break. Uh-oh. Hulk was visibly embarrassed by the whole affair, and Richard went on to sue Hulk and T, who had encouraged his tag team partner, to the tune of $5 million. All parties settled out of court years later in 1990 before the trial commenced. And that was the best case scenario, because the WWF's poster boy putting very real submission holds on TV hosts was yet another PR disaster for Vince McMahon. Or maybe the then boss had a right good chuckle about the whole thing once everything was hashed out. Who knows, he's a weird guy, isn't he? The publicity stunt gone wrong didn't snuff out momentum on the road to the first Mania at least, but Belzer was shaken up, and presumably didn't question whether or not wrestling was the real deal ever again. Lord only knows what he was thinking here when he egged Hogan on. Again, not wise. Number 27, Ronnie Piper refused to be pinned by Mr. T. Richard Belzer wasn't the only guy who didn't like Mr. T much in the mid-80s. Ronnie Piper was notoriously against the thought of seeing an actor waltz into the pro wrestling business, shoot straight to the top of cards, and worse, beat him in front of the cameras. Thus, Piper was frosty when it came to working with T. And he wasn't the only one. Some others in the WWF locker room also resented the A-Team star's special treatment and large payoffs whenever he was there. Others surely reasoned that having celebrities on their side helped general interest in super shows like WrestleMania. I mean, if more people watched and bought tickets, then the roster would earn more money, right? That was logical. But real-life logic sometimes had no place in the wild world of wrestling. In addition, Piper was known to be rather selective about doing the honors, so it's perhaps no shocker that he refused to lay down for Mr. T. We're talking about a heel who fought against doing and clean jobs for Hulk Hogan, for crying out loud. If anyone thought Hot Rod was gonna smile and stare at the lights for an outsider who wasn't part of the full-time locker room, then they had another thing coming. And at Mania 1, it was Paul Orndorff who ultimately ate the pin for his team. Then later, during a worked boxing bout at Mania 2, Piper only lost via disqualification. The Rowdy One was determined to adhere to his own rule about not jobbing for Mr. T. Number 26, the Wrestling Classic was supposed to launch a new series. Ever heard of WrestleVision? No, it wasn't a newfangled way of watching wrestling that quickly faded away, or a pair of goggles that turned everything you see into wrestling. It was, in fact, a new venture created by the WWF that hoped to follow up on the wild success of the first WrestleMania. WrestleVision was going to be a series of 5 special pay-per-view events, and the Wrestling Classic was going to be a dreamy introduction. Pity it was one of the worst pay-per-views ever committed to tape. In hindsight, following up on Mania's excitement with a rotten tournament that didn't even feature megastar Hulk Hogan in the main event picture was a poor piece of planning from McMahon and cronies. Hogan retained his WWF title versus Ronnie Piper via DQ in the mid-card. Remember? No clean jobs from Roddy. But the tourney itself failed to grip fans. Wrestling Classic performed so poorly at the box office that the rest of the WrestleVision project was put on the scrap heap immediately. The 7th of November 1985 card just did not cut it, and so WrestleVision went blurry before going blind. Vince would call off 4 subsequent shows, then focus his efforts on Mania 2 instead. And it maybe says everything that it turned out to be the sole pay-per-view of 1986. A crowd of around 14,000 fans watched Wrestling Classic live, but the show was a tangled mess of 16 matches, though most of them went less than 5 minutes. The WWF tried this tournament concept again a few years later at Mania 4, and okay, that was slightly better, but not by much. Oh well, it was worth trying. R.I.P. WrestleVision, we hardly knew ye. Number 25, WWE's Quiet Kings of the Ring. You'd have to be living under a boulder or requiring an eye test not to notice the garish outfits Macho King Randy Savage rocked up in during his time with that gimmick. Randy took on the royal vibes after feuding with Jim Duggan. Weirdly though, he didn't do it after winning the King of the Ring tournament in 1987. But that might be because King of the Ring was little more than a house show attraction in the 80s. The WWF ran it between 1985 and 1989, gave the concept a few years off, and then brought it back in 1991. After that, the promotion rethought King of the Ring as a standalone pay-per-view event that kicked off in 1993. Wrestlers like Harley Race, Savage, and Haku, who didn't actually win a tournament, all used the King character to varying effect. But what about the Quiet Kings, eh? Workers such as Don Morocco, Bret Hart, Ted Dibiasi, and final 80s winner Tito Santana didn't wear the crown and cape or carry a scepter around with them. And well, it's unclear why. Santana's King of the Ring victory was barely ever mentioned, if at all, on TV. It's curious that the Federation chose to keep such a landmark live event attraction a secret when the cameras were rolling. Seeing Tito become Rey Santana, that's King Santana in Spanish, could have actually been quite fun, but it wasn't to be. He was eventually repackaged as El Matador instead. So spare a thought for those who won King of the Ring in its infancy, but didn't get to make that part of their act on programming. Dibiasi in particular would have no doubt enjoyed bragging about that during his Milliondoll Man run, right? $1,000,000 King, anyone? That would have been a laugh. Number 24, Bruno Sammartino almost became WWF Intercontinental Champion in 1987. Beloved babyface Bruno Sammartino reigned as WWF Champion for an almost ridiculous 4,040 days across 2 gripping stints at the top throughout the 1960s and 70s. By the 80s, Bruno had soured on Vince Jr.'s methods, but he was coaxed back into the WWF fold as a manager for his son David. And naturally, it wasn't long before fan demand brought Bruno back into the ring too. Traditionalists who do their homework might know he wrestled a few tag bouts with David on company cards. But here's something you might not realize. Sammartino actually worked worked Intercontinental title singles bouts against both Randy Savage and the Honky Tonk Man in 1987, that sounds made up, or like something from WWE 2K25 Universe modes. But yeah, it really happened. Bruno won pretty much all of the matches by disqualification on house show loops, and there might have been talks about putting the belt on him for a spell. That would have definitely received a hearty pop from live crowds, especially in Sammartino heavy markets like New York or Philadelphia. Even going the dusty finish road in those matches would have popped the house, and it would have been worth it just for ringside snaps of Bruno holding the IC title high above his head for a bit. Honestly, the thought of Honky hamming it up in ring with a straight-laced icon like Bruno Sammartino it's almost too much to take. McMahon and his close-knit creative nucleus surely considered handing Bruno an olive branch here that'd get him further on side with the revolution. Just imagine it, Sammartino as IC champion in '87. Now that would have been insane. Number 23, they played the wrong tape at SummerSlam 1989. This is too good. At SummerSlam 1989, famous stickman Mean Gene Okerlund let out an infamous epic gaffe live on air. Or at least that's how it seemed to viewers watching on pay-per-view at home. The truth is even more outlandish, because the WWF actually had the chance to delete this unfortunate blooper from the show so nobody would ever see it. After all, Okerlund's botched promo with Rick Rude and Bobby Heenan had been pre-recorded earlier in the afternoon. The trio regathered their thoughts and filmed a retake, but staff in the Federation's production truck accidentally aired the wrong footage come showtime. And as a result, Gene's swear-laced outburst when the SummerSlam set behind him fell down, beamed live on the actual pay-per-view broadcast. What an outstanding mess from a promotion that had become renowned for slick promotion. Not on this occasion. Bruce Pritchard told this story on his podcast series Something to Wrestle With, and co-host Conrad Thompson could not believe what he was hearing as Bruce recalled everyone's reaction to the wrong tape being played. On commentary, Tony Schiavone and Jesse Ventura were blindsided by the mistake, and both audibly broke character and didn't really know what to say in response. How bloody brilliant is that? The WWF screwed themselves over by failing to make sure the right tape was lined up in between matches. Priceless stuff. Rude's face in the screenshot you can see right here says it all, really. That is a man who's eager to get through the night because he knows he's working the Ultimate Warrior for 16 long minutes. Oh, and on that, I bet the staffer responsible became the Ultimate Warrior about getting fired. I make myself chuckle. Number 22, Vince wouldn't tell Ted Dibiasi his gimmick until he signed. Pat Patterson called celebrated boots and tights wrestler Ted Dibiasi to tell him that Vince McMahon had an idea that he would love. But when Teddy went for the life-changing meeting in 1987, McMahon told him he'd have to sign a contract before finding out what the big plan was. It turned out to be the Milliondoll Man, a character that had made Dibiasi a household name. And Vince thought the idea was so good that he did not want to risk anyone else stealing it. So Dibiasi had a tough choice to make. Sign on the dotted line and potentially become the crappiest gimmick this side of Isaac Yankem and the Goon, or turn Vince down and go back home. Eager to be part of the WWF machine and knowing the character just had to be a winner, Ted chose to stick around and commit. And that right there was a shrewd decision, not least because he was about to live the high life on McMahon's dime. The Milliondoll Man had a reputation to uphold. Thus, he was ferried around in a swish limo, stayed in the finest hotels, could expense lavish meals and drinks, and even had a budget for fancy clothes. It was a literal dream come true, and there's a fair chance many others on the roster were supremely jealous of Dibiasi's lifestyle. Getting paid to live like that? What a life. It's also said that this is the persona McMahon would have played himself had his father let him become a pro wrestler. Ted was the right man in the right place at the right time. Number 21, the Milliondoll Cape belonged to McMahon. The Milliondoll Man character took off and made Dibiasi one of the business's biggest heels. After failing to win the WWF title, Ted appeared in a bunch of vignettes designed to introduce his tailor-made championship, 1989's Milliondoll Belt. And you might recall seeing Dibiasi wear an evil villain cape during some of these promos. So get this, that cape literally belonged to Vince McMahon. Why? Well, don't ask. Most fans out there presumably figured this was a prop that someone added in at the last minute to make Ted seem more over the top. But no, it actually came from Vince's wardrobe back home. Being honest, a lot of these stories about McMahon make more sense now than they ever did. In fact, he deemed it necessary to have a cape in his collection, and probably handed it to Dibiasi so casually speaks volumes. But Teddy didn't ask any questions. On a purely wrestling front, the cape did give DiBiase's gimmick more of an evil edge. He looked like a power-mad psychopath when wearing the thing out for visits to see how his new title was coming along. And this is yet another story that Conrad Thompson couldn't believe on Bruce Pritchard's podcast. Vince plucked a cape from his wardrobe and handed it to Ted like that was the most normal thing in the world. Who in the hell goes out of their way to add that to their clothing pile? A madman, that's who. At least it made the $1 Million Man look like a bigger heel though, so that's something. Number 20, Vince and Hulk spent 3 hours rewriting No Holds Barred. WWF pair Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon didn't really care for Dennis Hacken's original script for the No Holds Barred movie. So they locked themselves away in a hotel room and got busy redrafting the thing from beginning to end. There was a lot of money and possibly future movies hinging on the project. So McMahon and Hogan wanted it to be a smash hit that would cement their place in Hollywood. Later, Vince would admit that it wasn't really his finest hour. As it turned out, he only broke even on the project after various distribution and production costs weighed it down. No Holds Barred did pull $16 million domestically on an $8 million budget, but the WWF purse strings had been loose throughout. Therefore, McMahon felt a little bit disappointed by the financial outcome of his first major motion picture. Would things have been worse had they stuck to Hacken's script? Maybe, maybe not. But Hulk and Vince didn't plan to take any chances here. Now, it is likely that many of the cheesiest moments in the film can be traced back to them. The infamous Dookie scene has McMahon's toilet humor fingerprints all over it, for example. Hilarious stuff. There's more chaos to come out of No Holds Barred later on in the list. You might not believe one of the things the WWF concocted for WrestleMania 6. Let's just say that the Ultimate Challenge pitting Hulk versus Ultimate Warrior was way better than what McMahon and pals left on the cutting room floor. No Holds Barred did not get a follow-up, and Vince's movie dreams were pretty much shelved until the formation of WWE Films/Studios in 2002, and a ton of incredible films soon followed. Yeah. Number 19, Randy Savage body slammed a fan. In March 1988, a wrestling fan took Randy Savage to court after claiming he'd asked the wrestler to autograph his program, but was body slammed onto the pavement instead. The suit included claims that Randy then said, "How's that for an autograph, boy?" It's pretty difficult to find, concrete information on any of this, but it also sounds totally ridiculous. The thought of Macho Man getting out of his car to hit an actual wrestling move on a punter is a bit far-fetched. And to add to the confusion, some reports recapping the alleged incident say it happened in 1986, not 1988. The suit was settled out of court regardless, and everyone just moved on. It's still one of the most curious on-the-road stories of the era, though. Sadly, Randy's death in 2011 means he's no longer around to set the record straight on whether he legitimately left his vehicle to have a wrestle on concrete. And Lord only knows what Miss Elizabeth's face would have been like had something of the sort ever happened. She probably wouldn't have thought her then husband was the cream of the crop, let's be honest. Yeah, I'm not proud of that one. Kayfabe was dying out by the late 80s, but a lot of wrestlers still had an old school mentality around fans. Telling someone on the hunt for a signature to beat it is one thing though. Hitting them with a move they'd see on Wrestling Challenge is another. Number 18, Vince McMahon equals the real $1 Million Man. There's just no end to the ridiculousness involving Vince McMahon and Ted Dibiasi's $1 Million Man character. As aforementioned, it was a gimmick McMahon came up with for himself. Then he bestowed his own personal cape on Dibiasi for various vignettes debuting the $1 Million title. But the synergy between Vince and Ted's gimmick does not stop there. Bruce Pritchard once told a story about McMahon asking someone on a flight to put his cigarette out. At first, the guy said no, so Vince offered him money. Again, the answer was still no. Eventually, the then WWF boss upped his fee significantly, and the dude finally stubbed it out. McMahon then went right back to talk talking business like he hadn't just handed someone hundreds of dollars just to stop smoking. More money than sense. And Pritchard was stunned. He'd never seen anything like that in his life. Neither have most people, to be honest. And remarkably, he doesn't recall the situation ever threatening to boil over or end in a fistfight. Vince didn't want that, and the guy minding his own business having an in-flight cigarette certainly didn't either. However, he did walk off the plane richer for agreeing to McMahon's bizarre terms. That sort of outlandish behavior provided a firm foundation for the eventual Milliondoll Man character that Ted played on television. The cartoonish guys believed he could buy his way out of any situation, or wave enough money in front of people that they'd make problems just go away. And that is, well, pretty chilling considering what had come out about McMahon decades later. He really did want to be the living, breathing, walking and talking embodiment of that Milliondoll Man gimmick, didn't he? Number 17, a crazy plan for the 90s was shot down in 1989. So remember when I mentioned that strange Mania 6 idea before? Well, get this. One of the original plans penciled in for WrestleMania 6's Ultimate Challenge was Hulk Hogan versus Zeus. Yes, as in a sequel to No Holds Barr. Well, sort of. Hogan played a different character in the movie. The story called for monster heel Zeus coming for revenge in the real world, and the company would play that out on the biggest show of the year to kick off the 1990s. Wait, the 90s? This is an 80s video. What is going on? Don't worry, because the plan was squashed flat right at the tail end of 1989. So it still fits snugly here. It counts. Cooler heads prevailed, and everyone realized that Zeus couldn't work a lengthy singles match. Infamously, he had to be carefully guided through every single spot when teaming with Randy Savage versus Hogan and Brutus Beefcake at SummerSlam 89. Zook was a rank rookie in the wrestling game, after all. The pressure on his shoulders to match up well out there with Hulk was big enough in a tag setting. Just imagine how easily the guy would have folded had he been tasked with working a 20+ minute one-on-one versus Hogan at Wrestle Bloody Mania. Sure, Hulk would have carried the match, but there's only so much that one side can do in a contest. Look, Warrior wasn't exactly Bret Hart between the ropes, but he was definitely more accomplished than Zeus. Hogan could carry Ultimate to something passable if the match was formatted properly. Christ only knows how much of a disaster Mania 6 could have been had No Holds Barr 2 taken place in Toronto instead. It would have been memorable, I bet, though, just for all the wrong reasons. Number 16, why Hulk was bloated for Survivor Series 1987's main event. If you've ever watched the 1987 Survivor Series and thought, Hulk Hogan looks absolutely knackered. Well, there's actually a reason for that. Earlier in the day, Hogan had clocked newcomer The Ultimate Warrior stack up plate after plate at the Thanksgiving buffet. And he told those nearby, well, if that big B word can do it, so can I. I'll let you guess which B word he used. Gorging, Hulk scoffed a lot of food. And that's when he found out something horrifying. Warrior told Hogan he wasn't actually working on the show. Therefore, Hulk rolled into the pay-per-view's main event bloated and instantly regretted the sheer amount of grub he'd consumed. Those yellow trunks almost turned brown, brother. It was not out of the question that the WWF's poster boy could have had an embarrassing accident to put the first Survivor Series in the history books for the wrong reasons. Hogan was visibly sweating mere minutes into the match against Andre the Giant's squad. Worse, he went in knowing he had to work at least 18 minutes before being counted out of the bout. That had to be the longest 18 minutes of Hulk's career up until that point. Although the 20 he presumably would have worked with Zeus at Mania 6 would have no doubt beaten it years later. So there you have it. Hulkamania was stuffed full of turkey in late 1987, and he was in no fit state to wrestle a full-length match. Warrior likely just sat back comfortably, let his food digest, and then went back for another plate whilst impossibly still having rock-hard abs. I mean, what is going on? Not everyone's metabolism works the same, folks, and the Hulkster found that out firsthand. Number 15, Vince McMahon Sr. was proud of Vince Jr. It was generally accepted for decades that Vince Sr. disapproved of his son's business tactics, but that might not be as accurate as claimed. In fact, Vince Jr. told Netflix during their documentary series on him that his father did actually say he was proud of his efforts before he died. McMahon didn't linger on that too long though, and there's a visible point where he seems to realize he's opening up to complete strangers. The internal battle between appearing like a real human being and casting casting himself as some unstoppable robot who never slept during his time in charge of the WWF/WWE, punctuated the Netflix series. Some of the stories Vince told on it will make your toes curl. I mean, it's more the way he told them, actually. The one about him having 3 brains and one of them always thinking about sex? Yeah, that was awkward viewing. Very awkward. There's always been a narrative surrounding Vince Jr.'s monopolization of the pro wrestling biz in the 1980s. He tore down carefully placed political barriers governing the territorial system, and pretty much did what he wanted without asking for permission from other promoters. And most believe that left a bad taste in Vince Sr.'s mouth. But McMahon Jr. says his dad admired his ruthlessness, and he's glad he got to hear his father say that before he passed away. Promoters in other places like Florida, Atlanta, Texas, and more did not like the way Vince Jr. was doing things, but he absolutely changed the entire industry by being so cutthroat. And that's something Sr. relented eventually right before dying in 1984. Number 14, WWF title matches only headlined 4 of the first 13 pay-per-views. The WWF held 13 pay-per-views in the 1980s if you include No Holds Barred. They first hit pay-per-view with WrestleMania 1, then quickly followed that up with the Wrestling Classic in late 1985. 1986 only had Mania 2, and 1987 had Mania 3 and the first Survivor Series. SummerSlam was added in 1988. Then No Holds Barred came into view right before the 90s dawned. And not many of that initial clutch of pay-per-views had WWF title matches in the headline slot, you know. Hogan vs. King Kong Bundy in the cage at Mania 2, Hogan vs. Andre at Mania 3, Randy Savage vs. Ted DiBiase at Mania 4, and Savage vs. Hulk at Mania 5 were the only WWF title headliners from the Fed's first 13 super shows. That is a score of just 4 out of 13, which is pretty remarkable when one pauses to consider how monumentally important Hulk was as WWF Heavyweight Champion. Further adding to the shock factor, neither of the first 2 company pay-per-views gave the WWF title top billing. Neither of them. A tag bout pitting Hulk and Mr. T versus Piper and Orndorff stole the show at Mania 1, of course. Then a tournament final between Randy Savage and the Junkyard Dog main evented the Wrestling Classic. You could also argue that Hulk vs. Bundy was the third of 3 main events at Mania 2 as well, which would make the stats even more ridiculous. Incredibly, WWF title bouts only headlined 1 pay-per-view at best per year throughout the 80s. The biggest belt in the company should have been going on last more than that, right? But the 90s changed that by running back-to-back title matches last at Mania 6 and SummerSlam 90. Number 13, the Colossal Tussle. There was always something nonsensical about Vince McMahon banning words like wrestling whilst promoting his biggest annual event, WrestleMania. WWE stars were performers who could not wait to perform on the grandest stage, but they definitely weren't wrestlers who couldn't wait to wrestle wrestling matches inside a wrestling ring at WrestleMania. Try and work that one out. Now, Mania is certainly an iconic name, but it wasn't actually the first name drafted up. At one stage, McMahon almost slapped a green light on the woefully uninspired Colossal Tussle moniker instead. It was fan favorite ring announcer Howard Finkel who pitched WrestleMania. Reportedly, his brainwave was inspired by the Beatle-led Beatlemania of the 1960s. Thank God for Finkus Maximus and his love of 60s rock and roll, eh? It would have been perfectly fine for the WWF's commentary teams of the day to describe some of the matches taking place in Madison Square Garden as Colossal Tussles, but calling the entire event that? Nah, that would have sucked. And it's hard to imagine Mania would have gone on to become the pop culture phenomenon it did under any other name or branding. WrestleMania 1 was one of the most important wrestling shows of all time, so it had to feel grand. The name everyone went with in the end just rolls off the tongue, but Colossal Tussle sure doesn't. It's a clumsy name to say quickly, and even shortening it to just Tussle doesn't sound right either. Col Tuss? Nope, even worse. Let's hope McMahon gave Finkel a bonus for being so on the ball here. I mean, he arguably saved the industry's tentpole event from being a one-off. Number 12, WWE lied about a 9-second win. At WrestleMania 32, WWE announcers reminisced about the fastest Mania win in history when The Rock Rock beat Wyatt family man Eric Rowan in just 6 seconds. That's 3 seconds faster than King Kong Bundy beating SD Jones at the first WrestleMania, we were told. That right there was one of WWE's little lies. They kept it going for 31 long years despite being utter nonsense. The truth is waiting on anybody who revisits that first show today. Bundy smashed through Jones quickly, but the match was not 9 seconds. In reality, their bout went a comparatively Iron Man-esque 24 seconds. Later, during interviews, Bundy claimed that Jones wasn't happy about doing the honors so quickly. So the sly journeyman pro deliberately delayed the finish before a match-winning splash. It's hard to imagine Chiefs being thrilled with that behind the scenes, but hey, it happened. Vince McMahon surely wanted this bout to race by so the WWF could shout about a brand new record. They love to bang on about those records, don't they? In 2016, Rock and Rowan did legit go 6 seconds, so at least they could actually brag about making proper history there. Fans would not have fallen for the same trick during the modern era, would they? The 9 seconds idea followed Bundy into his second go-round with the company in the mid-90s, but it was totally made up. And also, somebody really needed to ask Jones why he thought losing in 24 seconds reflected any better on his career as a worker. Seriously, there's next to no difference there, so he probably should have just done as he was told and given Bundy his moment here. The Fed fancied building the egg-shaped bruiser as a monster heel foe for Hulk Hogan after all. Number 11, WrestleMania 1 was make or break. It is fascinating to think about how different things could have been for pro wrestling had WrestleMania been called the Colossal Tussle, I will never get over that name, and certain other things gone wrong. Vince and Linda McMahon put every resource they had on the line for the first Mania. Backstage, wrestlers were told that it was make or break, and those in the office knew their futures depended on the show being a success. Looking back, Mania 1 is actually one of the worst in the series. It wasn't a good card in ring at all, but interest was significant enough that the WWF went from strength to strength after the fact. That was the most important thing here. Privately, the McMahon family was saved from financial ruin. The story goes that they remortgaged the house and used home equity cash to help fund the show. It would have been a family disaster had the Madison Square Garden special flopped. A modest success would not have been enough either. This had to be a game-changing moment for the entire promotion and start building clear momentum. Thankfully though, Mania came through. Again, would that have happened had it been the tussle? Answers on a postcard, but yeah, probably not. Hell, I'd even confidently say absolutely not. WrestleMania was a strong name, and the promotional material showing a beaming Hulk Hogan standing alongside mainstream celeb Mr. T greatly helped sell this as a wonderful marriage of McMahon's sports entertainment with casual pop culture. The first show from 1985 was truly make or break for Vince, his then wife Linda, and the entire McMahon clan. But customers obviously didn't know ahead of time that it was going to be far from the greatest wrestling card ever. Still, it was a big success, and that's all that mattered. Number 10, Tony Atlas was paid $2,000 not to work WrestleMania. Tony Atlas might be one of the only people in history to earn a payday not to work WrestleMania. The guys who were supposed to work an 8-man tag at Mania 10 in 1994 joined him just shy of a full decade later. That match, which would have seen IRS, the Head Shrinkers, Rick Martel and Jeff Jarrett taking on 1-2-3 Kid, Sparky Plug, Tatanka and the Smoking Guns, was cancelled due to time constraints. In short, a ladder match between Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon you may have heard of went long. That wasn't what happened to Atlas though. He once told CBS he was backstage getting pumped up and ready to stare at the lights for King Kong Bundy when Arnold Scarlett pulled Tony aside and told him the news. Vince had decided to replace Atlas with journeyman SD Jones and spare Tony the job, but Scarlett assured Tony that McMahon would still honor their agreement and pay him for the show. The WWF came through on that too, and Atlas bagged $2,000 for doing literally nothing. Wish someone paid me to do nothing. He didn't even stick around for the full night. Tony left the building $2,000 richer without lifting a damn finger, and he was presumably back at his hotel relaxing by the time the main event hit the ring. It is something else that Tony didn't bother checking out the first Mania. But that goes to show how this was really just another booking for most wrestlers. Atlas, like everyone else back then, didn't know that WrestleMania was gonna blow up and become wrestling's biggest annual attraction. He was content with his nice $2K payoff for the night, but it'd be fun to find out what he thought about losing to Bundy in the planned 9 seconds. Can't imagine he'd have been thrilled. Would you be? Number 9, Survivor Series and Vince McMahon's ultimatum. momentum. No beating around the bush needed to kick this entry off. The first ever Survivor Series in 1987 was the WWF's bid to screw with the NWA's Starrcade event. McMahon launched his own end-of-year Thanksgiving special and warned cable pay-per-view providers they'd be barred from airing the following WrestleMania if they dared show Starrcade on their platforms. That was a brutal, cutthroat tactic from Vince, albeit one that was highly effective. A fair number of pay-per-view providers dropped the NWA product because they didn't want to miss out on proven box office winner Mania. It didn't even matter that WrestleMania 4 wound up being centered around a crummy tournament. Quality? Quantity was the most important thing to these groups. They were after McMahon's dollars, not his creative ideas. Later, Vince did the same thing again, sort of, by airing a free TV version of the first Royal Rumble opposite the NWA's Bunkhouse Stampede pay-per-view. His product, whilst nowhere near as solid between the ropes as latter-day NWA or early WCW overall, was glitzier and had a certain magic to it. The NWA found it difficult to compete there, not least when McMahon was going in two-footed on pay-per-view companies who wanted to maximize profits by airing both sides. Using Mania 4 as a bartering tool and effectively holding pay-per-view providers hostage was a hostile but genius move from the WWF's higher-ups. They knew they had one hell of a bargaining chip there. Everyone wanted a piece of Mania magic. WrestleMania had quickly surpassed Starrcade as the must-have pay-per-view in the marketplace, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. Number 8, Mania 2's cage match was unique for 35 years. Beating SD Jones in 24 seconds was an important part of King Kong Bundy's path towards a feud opposite Federation cash cow Hulk Hogan. By the time Mania 2 rolled around, Bundy was well placed to headline versus Hulk and believably threaten his WWF title reign. Looking to up the ante further, the promotion booked the match inside a steel cage. Ooh. That'd be the first and last traditional non-Hell in a Cell cage bout in the series until Mania 37's Shane McMahon versus Braun Strowman affair. Yeah, remember that? In case you were wondering, 4 Hell in a Cell matches have taken place at Mania, those being The Undertaker versus Big Boss Man at 15, Triple H versus The Undertaker at 28, Shane McMahon versus Taker at 32, and Edge versus Finn Balor at 39. So that means Hogan versus Bundy and Shane versus Braun are actually the only traditional cage clashes. Even more astonishingly, there was a huge 35-year gap between the pair. Mania 2 took place in 1986, whereas Mania 37 happened in 2021. It is kind of surprising that the WWF didn't book at least one more in the 80s or 90s, you know, before the Cell gimmick captured everyone's collective imaginations and became the go-to cage match to blow off heated, big feuds once it debuted in 1997. Hogan vs. Bundy was a slow plodder, but it was way more interesting than the Duff McMahon vs. Strowman business. The live crowd response alone makes Mania 2's effort superior. Number 7, Vince thought the Royal Rumble sucked at first. Pat Patterson was the one who came up with the Royal Rumble concept. When he pitched it to Vince McMahon, the boss paused for a minute before wondering aloud if it'd be something their audience would be interested in. After all, Battle Royals were an old-school wrestling nuisance to his world of sports entertainment. Never mind the fact McMahon continued to book old wrestling stuff while simultaneously hating on it. Weird guy. Later, Vince told Pat to tell NBC head Dick Ebersol that stupid idea he had for a new match type. Patterson must have been buzzing that Ebersol loved it. His excitement then passed over to McMahon, and the rest is history. However, the WWF decided not to air the show on pay-per-view like WrestleMania or the newfangled Survivor Series. No, they planned it to be a TV special on NBC. There were 2 distinctly different reasons for this. One, the WWF wanted to keep Ebersol and NBC on side as key partners because they knew the network played to a vast audience. And 2, running the first Rumble on TV instead of pay-per-view would directly impact the NWA's Bunkhouse Stampede show, and messing with that was too good an opportunity to miss. Don't forget that Vince had already threatened pay-per-view companies with missing out on the next Mania if they went with Starrcade. Now he was airing a pay-per-view quality show opposite Stampede. This was an absolute nightmare for the NWA, but they were powerless to do anything about it. Oh, and for reference, the free Rumble was a 20-man match that didn't quite hold the same thrills and spills as future 30-strong versions. Still technically a Rumble though. Number 6, 10 of the first Rumble's entrants never were worked another. Jim Duggan was handpicked as the right man to win the first televised Rumble. He eliminated one-man gang to score the victory, and a live crowd in Canada popped big despite the fact there was nothing really on the line for the fresh new matchup. It was just a win for the sake of it, really. It'd be years before the WWF dangled a WrestleMania headline spot in front of the winner. That didn't start until 1993, folks. And something else was notable about the 88 version. Exactly half of the 20 wrestlers involved in the match would never work another Royal Rumble again. Yeah, that's right, a full 10 of the 20 went one and done in the Rumble. The full list is Hillbilly Jim, Danny Davis, Sam Houston, Harley Race, Boris Zukov, both Killer Bees, Junkyard Dog, Butch Reed, and Don Morocco. This was their only Rumble in front of the cameras. That's perhaps most shocking when it comes to Race, Zukov, the Killer Bees, and Morocco. Those guys hung around the WWF for a few years after this debut, and it's hardly like McMahon turned his nose up at the thought of padding things out with tag teamers in the Rumble. He did it loads. Where's the justice for Big Boris? Poor lad. This is a quirky stat, because you'd think the WWF would lean on those who had experience in the match come the first proper pay-per-view version in 1989, but nope, that 30-man match had some bigger stars in it. So there was no room for Davis, Houston, the Killer Bees, and the like. At least they carved a unique place in WWE history. No one can take their place in the first. Number 5, Harley Race invaded a WWF locker room. Vince McMahon annoyed a lot of different wrestling promoters when he started squashing all manner of established unwritten rules of conduct in the business. The WWF hoovered up whatever talent they could, and McMahon was not averse to running shows in someone else's backyard. In 1984, he brought his superstars to Kansas City, but there was just one problem. Harley Race was pushing his own card across town at the same time. Steaming mad, the notoriously tough Race drove over to the WWF's venue and confronted Hulk Hogan in the locker room. Now Hogan claims that Harley pulled a gun on him, but Race said during a 2000 Shoot interview that he merely slapped Hulk in the ribs and just wanted to scare him a little bit. More Hulk just being Hulk there? Yeah, I vote probably. It wouldn't even break into the top 20 wildest things he's ever claimed were true. Nonetheless, the guys doing that 2000 Shoot didn't ask Race why he went after Hogan instead of McMahon. After all, Hulk was simply doing as he was told here. Vince was the one in charge, and he was the boss who decided it didn't matter if Harley was promoting his own card in the city. The WWF would beat that hands down and sell more tickets, guaranteed. Either Race was keeping his options open for a gig with the Federation, which he'd eventually get, or he wasn't actually that serious or angry. It might well be 100% true that he just fancied seeing Hulk quake in his boots for a minute or two. Harley surely knew a lot of the workers in the WWF locker room anyway. Number 4, WWE had a stand-in for Andre the Giant. The real colossal tussle was getting Andre the Giant to commit to WrestleMania 3. The big man was in a lot of pain by 1987, and he'd all but officially retired from the ring. Seeing dollar signs in a mega match with Hulk Hogan, McMahon arranged a meeting with his pal and asked for one more favor: turn heel and put Hogan over. At first, Andre was hesitant. This is a guy who could barely walk around without being in agony, and here was Vince asking him to take a few bumps on the biggest wrestling show of all time. Eventually, the Giant said yes, but the WWF knew they had to install a contingency plan if Andre's physical condition worsened before the 29th of March. So, in a clever move, McMahon had someone else waiting in the wings on reserve. Paul Orndorff was that man. He'd already worked extensively with Hogan, and Mr. Wonderful was over enough as a top heel to slot in if Andre couldn't make it. That wouldn't be ideal, of course, but it'd be a real needs-must kind of situation. It's fair to say that Hulk versus Orndorff wouldn't be talked about in the same breath as Hulk versus Andre, though. The former friends had a clunky, strained match, but Hogan slamming the big guy would go down in company history as the first true WrestleMania moment, and it's arguably the greatest Mania moment of all time still. And unfortunately for Mr. Wonderful, he was strictly a substitute here. Orndorff didn't get to work a different match on the card once it became clear that Andre was going to appear as planned. Number 3, why Andre changed from trunks to that singlet. Andre debuted his iconic single-strap black singlet at WrestleMania 3, but this wasn't some inspired aesthetic change carefully designed to add a new wrinkle to the Giant's game. No, he did that because he needed to wear a back brace, and his old trunks wouldn't have covered that part of his body. The singlet's material hid the brace on his lower spine from fans, and that is really, really sad, isn't it? Andre's health health had degenerated to the point he needed the extra support or he just wouldn't have been able to show up at all. He was having real problems even getting from A to B. So the special ring carts the WWF introduced for Mania 3 were essential too. Without them, the Giant might not have been able to walk the lengthy aisleway to the ring, step over the ropes, and start his business with Hulk. Vince McMahon and his WWF troops took as many precautions as they possibly could to get the match in the ring, and that is something McMahon later spoke about to Netflix. He knew it was important to get Andre and Hulk nose to nose at least. Then, if all the Giant could do was take an awkward slam and leg drop, well, then so be it. His back had to be screaming throughout that 12-minute match. Rewatch the thing now and you'll see several moments where Andre literally needed the ropes to haul his massive frame back up. He was a shell of his former self here, and looked every bit the faded warrior who had little left to offer physically. But he still managed to form half of one of the all-timer great wrestling moments. Number 2, Ric Flair almost jumped for SummerSlam 1988. Those who kept a close eye on the pro wrestling industry at large in 1988 could see how separate the WWF's product was from the NWA. That'd also be true once Ted Turner took control and turned it into WCW. In Atlanta, hot in-ring action and excellent traditional wrestling angles were the most important thing to fans. But in the WWF, star power and storylines reigned. That's why it's so incredible to think of the NWA's top star jumping ship. Ric Flair nearly did it though. Sure, he'd make the leap in 1991 for a 2-year spell on Vince McMahon's side, but things were different in 88. Flair was renowned as the wrestler of the 80s, and he was undoubtedly the most important worker to the NWA. Not only did the Nature Boy have top matches against all comers, but he was one of the greatest promo men in the business too. To say losing him would have been disastrous would be an understatement. Losing him would have been terrible, but the WWF planned to take Flair from the Alliance ahead of the first SummerSlam. Reportedly, he would have wrestled Randy Savage while still NWA champion, which is some thought. Changing his mind / getting cold feet, take your pick my friend, Rick decided to stay put and help the NWA finalize a deal with Turner instead. Savage teamed with Mega Powers partner Hogan against Ted Dibiasi and a fading Andre the Giant on that card. Being honest, that Mega Powers union makes the Flair thing a bit dubious. There's no way a top promoted bout like Mega Powers versus Mega Bucks was off the table just for Rick. He likely would have tangled with somebody else at SummerSlam, which would have been some conversation to sit in on. Number 1, Jim Ross overheard a plot to murder Vince McMahon. Speaking of staggering conversations, Jim Ross tells the story of being in a nondescript bathroom stall in the mid-1980s when several NWA promoters walked in and started openly discussing having Vince McMahon killed. Knowing he had to stay quiet as a mouse, JR pulled his legs up so nobody could see his feet underneath the door. He didn't want to explain what he'd heard, or for anybody to even know he was there in the first place. One of the unnamed promoters said he could quote-unquote get it done for $700. Ross stayed put until everybody had left, and he wondered to himself if he should ever tell a living soul about what he'd just listened to. Nothing came of the conversation. I mean, clearly. This was surely just a bunch of disgruntled promoters angry that McMahon had muscled in on their territory and was presenting a glossier product to fans. But still, like, wow, JR had to be sweating it out in that cubicle for a while. He eventually told Vince all about the incident when he went to work for the WWF in the early 90s. McMahon had caused a lot of hurt and anger by stepping on toes without remorse. He systematically tore down established wrestling norms his father had followed, and he sought to monopolize the industry. The sinister murder plot that Jim overheard was presumably called off after 1 or 2 chats. A 1980s hitman could have received just $700 to change the face of the industry forever by taking out the WWF's leading man though, and that right there is scary stuff. Imagine how JR felt. Poor JR, man, poor JR. And you have reached the end of this awesome What Culture Wrestling video, but wait, there is more! So carry on your YouTube journey with us by tapping on this 100 fascinating facts about WWE in the 1990s list. Another decade, have fun.